Why did you do that, you shameless girl? Tamara Ivanovna's steel-hard voice cut through the morning silence so sharply that the neighbor's ginger cat leapt off the wooden fence and into the thick nettles. The handle of the heavy hoe slipped from Katerina's wet palms. She slowly straightened her stiff back and wiped beads of sweat from her dirty wrist with the back of her hand. The sun had only just begun to beat down over the summer cottage area near Sabrav, but the air already felt heavy and sticky. The old woman stood frozen by the freshly dug patch of soil, breathing hard and wheezing. The former kindergarten teacher's face was mottled with red blotches of outrage, and her faded checkered housecoat trembled with every sharp movement. I just replanted the blackcurrant bushes, the young woman answered calmly, though inside her chest the familiar knot of anxiety tightened. There, in the deep shade under the old walnut tree, the branches had begun to dry out and the roots were rotting from constant dampness. You replanted them? Tamara Ivanovna stepped forward, almost trampling the young shoots. Who gave you permission to touch those bushes? My late Mikola planted them 20 years ago. This is my land, my plants, and only I decide where they grow and where they dry up. From behind the corner of the ramshackle shed, Dmytro cautiously peeked out. He was holding a hammer, as if looking for an excuse for his absence during the argument. Instead of coming over to calm his mother, he quickly looked away and started hammering a rusty nail into a rotten plank, pretending to be busy. Katerina sighed bitterly. Again, no support. 3 years of marriage had turned into an endless test of endurance, with her mother-in-law as the chief examiner and her husband playing the role of silent observer. This soil is better here, sunnier, she tried to explain, nodding toward 3 neat holes, generously watered, where the rescued bushes now stood green. By autumn you'll see how well they grow. I had to save the variety. You're saving the variety, are you? Just look at this city agronomist of yours, the mother-in-law snapped, throwing up her hands. You've ruined my whole plot. Put everything back by evening, or your feet won't be welcome on this dacha again. With that, the old woman turned sharply and headed toward the house, slamming the warped veranda door behind her. Katerina stood alone in the middle of the garden. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she wasn't going to cry. Too much moisture had already been wasted over the past few months on empty grievances. She walked over to her husband. He was still tapping at the board with his hammer, even though the nail had long since bent in two. At least say something, she said quietly, looking at his hunched back. Dmytro finally stopped and wiped his dirty hands on his old jeans. What was I supposed to say? You know Mom's temperament. Why did you go poking around those currant bushes? They were growing fine. They were dying, Dmytro. Just like everything here, if nobody takes care of it. Katerina looked into her husband's eyes, hoping to catch at least a trace of understanding, but found only irritation that their peaceful weekend had been ruined. Do what she asks. Put the bushes back under the walnut tree. I'm already sick to death of these scenes. He drew the edge of his hand across his throat and quickly walked toward the summer shower, leaving his wife alone with the scattered tools. Moving the plants back into the shade would mean certain death for the roots. Katerina pressed her lips together, gathered the empty buckets, and went to the water pump. She would not move them back, even if it cost her the last crumbs of peace in this family. The heat grew stronger. The dacha cooperative slowly came alive. Somewhere a lawn mower buzzed, the smell of burning dry branches mixed with damp earth. From the neighboring plot, separated only by a low chain-link fence, came the clatter of metal. Andrei was working there, a local mechanic who had moved to the dacha after a difficult divorce. He was always fixing something or repairing his old motorblock tractor. The man straightened up, wiping grease-stained hands with a rag, and looked attentively at the upset neighbor. "Loud day you're having," he said in a low, calm voice. "Another territorial dispute?" Katerina gave a forced smile, setting a bucket under the cold stream from the pump. "A war for the harvest," she said. "More precisely, for the right to command the parade." Andrei came closer to the fence. He was tall, lean, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes that appeared whenever he squinted in the sun. Unlike her mother-in-law, the neighbor never fussed or hid from problems. You did the right thing moving the currants into the sun. The soil under that walnut is acidic. Not even weeds like to grow there, he said, nodding toward the scandalous planting. If you need compost, I've got some extra at the back of the garden. I can throw it over the fence. Thank you, Katerina sighed, turning off the tap. Water overflowed the bucket rim and soaked her old sneakers. If it comes to defending the barricades, call me. I've got pitchforks. Andrei smiled, and the joke made things feel a little lighter. The rest of the day passed in oppressive silence. Tamara Ivanovna deliberately clattered dishes in the summer kitchen, refusing to call her daughter-in-law for lunch. Dmitro ate by himself, then lay down in the room with the fan on. Katerina spent the rest of the evening weeding the carrot beds, burying her heavy thoughts in monotonous physical work. On Sunday evening, the trip back to Vinnytsia felt like an evacuation. The bus leaving the dacha market was packed with tired people carrying buckets, hose, and bags. The heat in the cabin was unbearable. It smelled of sweat, fresh dill, and dust. Dmitro sat in the only free seat at the back, immediately pulled out his phone, and disappeared into the news feed. Katerina stood nearby, holding onto the hot handrail and barely keeping her balance on the sharp turns near Pirogov Hospital. Her husband didn't even offer to carry the heavy bag with her dirty work clothes. Outside the window, the familiar streets of the evening city slid by. Unisty Avenue breathed hot asphalt. Young people strolled lazily along the alleys, enjoying the weekend. But inside Katerina, emptiness was growing. Once, these trips had seemed romantic. At the beginning of their relationship, they had planned a future together, dreamed of their own apartment and children. Now life had shrunk to a rented two-room flat on Koletska Street and the weekly labor in his mother's garden, where every step was tightly controlled and criticized. On Monday morning, the alarm rang at 6 sharp. It was time to get ready for work. Katerina worked as an administrator in a small private clinic in Zamosti. The job required constant politeness, neatness, and nerves of steel. In the kitchen, yesterday's coffee smell still lingered. Dmitro was still asleep, turned toward the wall. She quietly brewed a fresh cup, took a few sips, and looked out the window at the gray apartment blocks. She felt incredibly tired. Her back ached after the weekend, and a long work week lay ahead. At work, time dragged slowly. Patients came one after another. Some complained about the queue, others forgot their documents. Katerina mechanically smiled, filled out forms, answered dozens of calls. During lunch break, she stepped outside to the clinic's entrance to get some fresh air. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her medical coat. A message from her husband. Mom called. Her blood pressure went up. She says it's because of your stunt in the garden. Stop by the pharmacy after work and buy her some drops. No question about how she was feeling. No word of support. Just another order. She put the phone away, feeling a bitter lump rise in her throat. In the evening, after buying the medicine, she went to her mother-in-law's place. Tamara Ivanovna lived in a spacious 3-room apartment in Vinnytsia. She opened the door herself, looking perfectly healthy and full of strength for more lectures. You brought them? She asked instead of greeting, taking the bag of medicine. Come to the kitchen. We need to talk. Katerina took off her shoes and entered the familiar, perfectly tidy room. On the table lay a checkered notebook filled with neat handwriting. I calculated the dacha expenses, the mother-in-law began, sitting down and adjusting her glasses on the bridge of her nose. Fertilizer has gone up. We need new film for the greenhouse. Dmitro said you're saving money right now, but the dacha is a shared matter, so this month I need 5,000 hryvnias from you. 5,000? Katerina could hardly believe her ears. Tamara Ivanovna, we agreed we'd only buy what was necessary. My salary goes entirely to our rent and utilities, and Dmitro barely covers groceries. We don't have an extra 5,000. Extra? The old teacher's eyebrows rose. So the land that feeds you all winter is extra to you? And who's going to pay for the security in the cooperative? The electricity? If you don't want to contribute, then don't come at all. I'll manage on my own. But in winter don't come asking for potatoes and preserves. It was a blatant manipulation. Tamara Ivanovna knew perfectly well she could not physically manage 8 plots of garden by herself. She needed free labor in the form of her daughter-in-law and son, and now extra money for her endless dacha plans. I'll talk to Dimitro, the young woman said briefly, understanding that arguing was useless for now. When she returned home, she found her husband in front of the television. Dinner had not been made. Dirty dishes had piled up in the sink. Your mother is demanding 5,000 for the dacha, she said from the doorway, dropping her bag onto the hallway ottoman. Dimitro didn't tear his eyes away from the screen. Well, we have to give it. What else can we do? What money, Dimitro? We set that aside for my tooth treatment. You know the doctor said I can't wait any longer. The tooth can wait. The seedlings need to be planted now. Mom's already nervous because of your currents. Don't make problems out of nothing. I'll transfer the money to her tomorrow. Katerina froze. His words hurt more than a slap. Her health, her needs, once again placed last, to his mother's whims and tomato seedlings. You know what? Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to speak firmly. If you transfer that money, you're going to the dacha alone this weekend. I'm not going there anymore. Dimitro finally turned his head. In his eyes there was genuine incomprehension mixed with irritation. Here we go again. A tantrum. It's hard for you to help your own mother? She's an old woman. It's hard for me to be a nobody in my own marriage, Katerina snapped. Have you ever stood up for me, even once? Have you ever asked what I need? Don't yell, the neighbors will hear. The man grimaced and turned the television up louder. Calm down, then we'll talk. I'm tired from work and don't want to listen to your complaints. Katerina silently turned away, went into the bathroom, and locked the door. She turned on the water to drown out her own sobs and looked in the mirror at her gaunt face, dark circles under her eyes, and did not recognize the lively, energetic girl she had been only 3 years earlier. The next several days passed in a mute standoff. The couple exchanged only curt remarks about everyday matters. On Friday evening, Dimitro demonstratively began packing a sports bag. Coming, or are you staying here to make a point? He asked coldly, standing in the hallway. Katerina looked at him from the kitchen and knew that if she didn't go now, it would become a point of no return in their relationship. But she no longer had the strength to endure. I'll go, she said quietly. But only to water my bushes. Saturday morning greeted them with merciless sun. The summer had been abnormally dry. Even the morning dew brought no relief. The soil in the garden had cracked, turning into hard concrete. Tamara Ivanovna met them on the porch with a victorious expression. Well then, agronomist, go look at the results of your work. Katerina dropped her things on the veranda and hurried behind the house. Her heart clenched painfully. The transplanted currant bushes looked miserable. The leaves had yellowed and curled. The thin branches hung limply toward the ground. Heat and transplant stress were doing their work. I told you they'd die, came the delighted voice of her mother-in-law behind her. Look at the damage you caused. You should have listened to your elders instead of showing off your city stupidity. Now dig them up and throw them on the compost pile so my eyes don't have to see this horror. Katerina dropped to her knees by the outermost bush and broke the dry crust of soil with her fingers. Deeper down, she could still feel a little moisture. The plants were alive, simply fighting for survival with their last strength. I'm not throwing them out, she said firmly as she stood. They'll recover. They just need water and time. Time? I don't have time to wait while your weeds dry up completely. Dimitro. The old woman shouted. Bring the shovel. Uproot this nonsense. Dimitro appeared from behind the shed, reluctantly dragging the shovel behind him. He looked at his mother, then at his wife. Katya, really, look at them. It's already trash. Let's clean it up and forget it. Don't you dare touch them. Katerina stood in front of the bushes, shielding them with her body. Her voice had a metallic edge her husband had never heard before. This is my work, and I'll save them. Do what you want, you crazy woman. Tamara Ivanovna waved a hand and walked off. But don't use water from the pump for this garbage. We still need to water the cucumbers. Water is on schedule. And indeed, the cooperative supplied water only twice a week for a few hours. The reservoirs emptied quickly. Being forbidden to use the common water was a cruel blow. All day Katerina avoided speaking to her relatives. She worked in the far corner of the plot to avoid their eyes. When the sun began to set, painting the sky above the forest in blazing colors, she took 2 empty buckets and slipped out the gate. The river was about 2 kilometers away, down a steep slope. Going down was easy, but climbing back up the narrow path with 20 liters of water in her hands was a real ordeal. She stopped every 10 meters, gasping for breath. Her arms went numb. The metal handles burned her palms. Halfway back, her strength gave out completely. She set the buckets down on the grass and sat beside them, hugging her knees. Then the dam broke, and tears of despair spilled freely. She cried quietly, helplessly, mourning herself, her dreams, her ruined life, a life that had become nothing but constant struggle. Suddenly, a familiar voice came out of the darkness. Katerina jerked up and quickly wiped her cheeks with dirty palms. Andrei was standing on the path. In his hands he held a large plastic canister. "What are you doing here?" she asked hoarsely. "The same thing as you. Saving the crop. Our well dried up. I have to carry water from the spring." He stepped closer, looked at her full buckets and then at her tear-stained face, and without another word set down his canister, lifted both of her buckets, and confidently walked uphill. "Wait, I can do it myself." "It's too heavy." Katerina hurried after him. "You already tried doing it yourself," he said over his shoulder. "Let me help." They walked in silence. Andrei moved steadily, though the load was clearly heavy. By the gate of her dacha, he stopped and gently set the buckets on the ground. "You know," he said quietly, looking into her eyes, "plants feel when someone fights for them. And people too. If you decided not to give up, they'll survive." "Thank you," Katerina whispered. Inside her chest, an unexpected warmth spread from such simple human care, something she had not felt in a very long time. "Tomorrow morning I'll connect an old pipe from my barrel to your fence. You'll be able to water your currants with a hose instead of dragging water from the river. Just don't tell your mother-in-law where the water comes from." He turned and went back to his yard, leaving her alone with her thoughts. That night Katerina lay awake for a long time on the narrow sofa in the summer kitchen, listening to the monotonous chirping of crickets. Dimitro slept in the house and had not even asked where she had spent the evening. The next 3 weeks turned into a grueling survival marathon. The heat did not let up. Vinnytsia region was suffering from drought. Tamara Ivanovna complained of high blood pressure, took her pills, but every morning still went out to inspect her domain, finding new reasons to be dissatisfied. Dimitro grew increasingly irritable. The money he had given his mother had hit their budget hard. They started saving on groceries and quarreled over every little thing. But every evening, when twilight covered the dacha area, Katerina took the old hose and connected it to the pipe Andrei had secretly installed. She generously watered the 3 currant bushes, carefully loosened the soil around them, and removed the dry leaves. It became her personal ritual. Her only refuge in a toxic atmosphere. Andrei often worked nearby. They exchanged short phrases across the fence. He talked about repairing cars, about how he was trying to rebuild his life after his ex-wife's betrayal. Katerina listened to his calm, steady voice and felt the tension of the workday gradually melt away. There was no falseness in him. He didn't try to seem better than he was, didn't manipulate, didn't blame circumstances. He simply did his job. One evening, at the end of July, after another long dry spell with not a drop of rain, Dimitros stepped onto the porch with a phone in his hand. His face was grim. The landlord called. Rent's going up by 3,000 next month. Katerina was just rolling up the hose, and the news hit her like a hammer blow.